Hi, I'm Frank McDonough, and this is Gardens of California. This is the class that looks at not just how we garden, but why we garden. Why we do the things we do in our gardens, why we're so emotionally attached to some plants, what is driving our psyches when we're out there gardening, hoeing, mowing, and basically making physical wrecks of ourselves. We take a look at that here on Gardens of California. And today we're going to be looking at recyclable, renewable, and reasonable stuff to put in your garden. Things like mulch, fertilizers, structures. How can you do your part to make sure that what you're using in your garden is recyclable, renewable, or reasonable? We'll have that in the lecture later on. Also, we are live and we're online. That means that you can call at any time with your gardening questions. And we've changed the format a little bit here in that we're taking questions right off the bat. So if you have a question about plants, lawns, trees, I will do my best to field it. And if I don't know the answer, then we'll get back to you. 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call for your questions. And if you're a regular viewer, you know that we have a feature where I ask you to guess the identity of a esoteric, hard to find, or rare plant, garden item, tool, or whatever. And do I have something for you? Look at that. Look at this is an amazing looking plant. Actually, I'm not going to ask you, take a quick look at that, get a close up, and look at that. No fair cheating. Now, speaking of cheating, I'm going to pull a fast one on you. This is not the plant that I'm going to ask about. This is actually a Albuca, and the full name on that is Albuca spiralis, and it's actually a cross between that and another plant, and I just picked this up at the Cactus and Succulent show yesterday. That one is so tough, I don't even know it. So I'm not going to ask you that. What I'm going to ask you to guess is this one right here, and I know we have members of our audience who will get this. Take a look at that, and we'll get a close-up on the flowers. The flowers are very important for identification on this plant, so take a look at those. Burn them into your memory, and good luck, because if you call in with the correct identity of this plant, you'll win my respect, the respect of everybody else watching Gardens of California, and if that wasn't enough, and it would be enough for me, you will also get a set of mycorrhizal tablets that you can put into your garden to help increase the health of your plants, courtesy of Burkhardt Nurseries. 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call if you think you know what this plant is, and I am open for any and all gardening questions starting right now. So 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call. In fact, I'm going to be going to some of the questions that I get throughout the year in the course of my job duties, and we're going to look at what's happening out there in your neighborhood, what's happening out there in Los Angeles that you should be aware of, and maybe when I answer these questions, if you have the same problem, you can use that solution for your problem too. My first call, I'm going to go with the inquiry that I'm going to address is Tim from West LA. Tim says that the fire department he has a place in Big Bear. And he says, hey, the fire department wants me to trim back and top these beautiful manzanita bushes. They're very large, at his cabin in Idlewild. Actually, that's a little further away from Big Bear. Now, he wants to know, A, can I fight the county on this one? And B, if not, is it going to hurt the plants in the long run? Well, one, you can try fighting the county. It's not a very good idea. You'll just probably waste more of your time than it's worth. But if you're talking about just topping these plants, chances are if you do it at the right time, it won't harm them that much. In fact, manzanitas have evolved to be killed down to the very ground level where they sprout. They have a crown, which is the part where the roots meet the branches. They have a crown that's somewhat fireproof, and it has a lot of nutrition in it, and it allows the plant to regenerate after a fire. That same crown, that same regeneration ability that the plant has, allows it to spring back from rather severe prunings, although I would not prune it too frequently because you could kill it if you did that. So Tim, if you're out there, go ahead and do what the county says. Believe me, the manzanitas will probably spring back. My next question was Beulah from Pasadena, and she called in and asked, my friend says I should try stevia. And she went on to say, stevia, I've heard it's good for diabetes, it's a sweetener that doesn't have any calories, what do I do? So you're talking to the right person, Beulah, because I've grown stevia and it's fairly easy. In fact, I grew it in pots. I grew stevia in regular potting soil in 5-gallon pots. You start out with the small plants and you plant them. They are pretty close to biennials. They take a long time to mature before they're ready. But usually if you plant them in the fall now, you will be able to harvest those in the spring. One thing you should remember with these plants, the stevias, is that they are biennials. After about 2 years, they're gone. But what you can do is A, collect seeds, or B, to get a little extra time on those plants, you cut the flower heads off of the plant. You just give it a good haircut to where all the flower heads are off of the plant, and you should be able to keep that going for at least another 2 or 3 months past the time that it would usually expire. Another thing about stevia is they really prefer cool weather and cooler temperatures. You'll do better with them on the coast, and I see that Beulah is from Pasadena. If you're in the bottom area, the Arroyo area, that actually gets some coastal influence. It's a very interesting area. The same thing is true with areas like Encino, Studio City, North Hollywood, areas that are along Sherman Oaks, that are along the LA River. What happens is the coastal influence creeps up, and just in that area around the river, plus you have the ability of the water in the river to regulate temperature. So you have two things going for a very mild climate. As a result, you can grow tropicals outside most years. Unfortunately, if we have a frost that's hovering around 22 for a few days, you may lose everything. Just bring them into the house and that happens. And another call I got, is from Riva from La Cañada. And Riva says, hey, the city, now it's not the county, it's the city, wants him to clean up the mess underneath his avocado tree. And I asked him, what kind of mess do you have underneath this avocado tree? He says, well, I like to leave the leaves on the ground so that they'll be a mulch for the tree, and that way too, and he added, I don't need to fertilize. And he's right. If you have a tree mulch of avocado leaves around the base of the tree, chances are you won't have to fertilize much, if at all, with that kind of setup. Now the problem is it looks really messy. Your neighbors tend to resent that. But on the plus side, it's providing micronutrients, nitrogen, what are called chelating agents. These are compounds that help the plant bring in micronutrients, and it also feeds the good fungi and bacteria in the soil as well. Add to that, it helps moderate the temperature around the roots of the plant, and so you have a layer of leaves that actually is performing 2 or 3 different important jobs for the plant. So you might want to argue that with the city, but again, it is the city. So if they're adamant about getting those leaves out from underneath your tree, the next best thing is to replace the leaves with some type of bark mulch. That bark mulch will kind of do the same thing that the leaves did. They'll act as a mulch. They'll slowly decay and provide micronutrients and nutrients to the soil organisms that are beneficial to the plant, and it'll look good too and probably keep the city off your back. So Riva, again, go to the city, tell them what I told you about how valuable those leaves are to the health and well-being of the plant, and if they're still not going to listen, and they probably won't because they're bureaucrats, then go to the next step, which is to replace those leaves with shredded bark, regular bark, any kind of slow decaying bark, and that will take care of the problem. That'll keep your tree healthy, and it'll also keep the city off of your back. So, speaking of city and on your back and all that other good stuff, a lot of cities have ordinances that talk about oak trees. And cities have a vested interest in keeping these oak trees alive and in the neighborhood. Well, what kind of interest is that? Are they like very into environmental science? Are they, are they all tree huggers? If you've ever been to city government, you know that that may be true, but it may not be true. No, the reason that oak ordinance is enforced is twofold. One, oaks are dying off in our area. Their ecology, which is vital to keeping some insects in check, is going with them. And here's the kicker, here's the real reason I think that cities like to see oaks stick around. Oak trees increase property values in a neighborhood tremendously. And that's really important these days. For instance, if you're selling a house for, it would have been $500,000, now it's about $300,000. If you're selling your house for $300,000, you could probably get $50,000 more if you have a large, picturesque oak tree in your front yard. And if your neighbors all have picturesque oak trees too, well, that's going to raise your total value of property up even more. So again, now, with that set up, I'd like to introduce our first video for today, and that is Jerry Turney from the Agricultural Commissioner's Office, and he's been a regular guest on this show. Jerry Turney talking about oaks and their care. So let's take a look at this.
My name's Jerry Turney, and I'm the plant pathologist for the Los Angeles County Agricultural Commissioner Weights and Measures Department, County of Los Angeles. And I'm standing today in an oak woodland of Engelmann oak at the Los Angeles County Arboretum. This is a unique oak grove. Engelmann oaks are primarily distributed in San Diego County. And this is the northernmost naturally occurring grove of Engelmann oaks. You do find them occasionally used as street trees or in landscapes, but they are less frequently encountered than some of the more common oak trees that we grow in Southern California, particularly the California coast live oak, which is by far the most common oak we see in Southern California, especially used as street trees and in people's gardens. One of the most important factors in taking care of your oaks is watering the oak. In fact, our native oaks really require no supplemental irrigation. It's really critical that you not water your oaks during the summer months. So the major mistake that people make is by planting a lawn under their oaks and watering it 2 or 3 times a week through the summer months. Now, many of our native oaks, or naturally occurring oaks, have a fungus on their root system that we often refer to as the oak root rot fungus, which is botanically known as Armillaria amelia. Now, this fungus does cause root rot and can kill your oaks. The major way, or the most important way, to control this pathogen on your oak is to not water it in the summer months. You keep the soil wet, the fungus grows very quickly, and this will kill your oak tree. If you let it go dry all through the summer months when it is naturally dormant, that's how you can control this fungus, and your tree can live for decades even though it may be infected. So if you don't want your tree to look like this, don't water it in the summer. Another really important factor in taking care of oak trees is to avoid disturbing the root system of the oaks themselves. So trenching, cutting the oak roots for any reason at all can be very detrimental to your oak trees, especially within the drip line. In fact, you should probably have a zone of at least 5 to 10 feet outside the drip line where you do not disturb the oak roots. If it's necessary to install utility lines in close proximity to an oak tree, you should try and drill that hole through the soil without cutting the roots. So in addition to not disturbing the roots and not watering your oak tree in the summer, it's also important to prune your trees properly when it's appropriate. Now, generally, the recommendation for pruning any tree is not to remove more than 25% of the green wood in a single pruning. Now, for oaks, it's better to lower that to about 10 to 15%. So never remove more than 10 to 15% of the actual living wood in the tree in a single pruning. And when you're pruning, always prune to enhance the natural form of the tree. Making large cuts can be very detrimental to a tree, so avoid any cuts over 2 inches if possible. When removing a large scaffold branch, you need a very valid reason for that. You don't just start removing large branches unless you have a very good reason to do so. such as it's blocking a sign that's critical for traffic, such as a stop sign or a traffic light, or it's so low that you can't walk by the tree and you need more clearance for foot traffic. Not just, well, I think that's good for the tree, so let's whack it off. Always prune back to the origin of the branch if possible. If not, you prune back to a side branch that's at least 1/3 the size of the branch you're pruning. In this case, it's probably best to visualize, say, a 3-inch branch that you're pruning, and you'd prune back to a 1-inch side branch. So that 1-inch side branch is 1/3 the size of the branch you're pruning. Another important aspect of pruning trees is the time of year that it's most appropriate to prune oak trees. Generally speaking, it's best to prune trees when they're dormant. This diminishes the primary response to pruning, which is rapid new growth. There's other problems that can occur when pruning trees at the wrong time of year, particularly if you prune, say, a coast live oak in the early spring. This coincides with their growth flush. It can often result, particularly in that species, in powdery mildew outbreaks. So the best time to prune oaks is typically in the summer months when they're dormant. A lot of people recommend October or into November. It's also important not to over thin them, removing too much of the foliage and then exposing any plant material under the tree to the harsh sun that may burn it. So what we were just talking about was what's best to plant under your oak tree. You want to select drought-tolerant plant materials such as this Santa Cruz Island gooseberry. And that way you don't have to water this plant very often, and you can let it grow dry most of the summer, or maybe spot water it once a month. And that way you're not soaking the soil all around your oak tree all summer long unless you would with a lawn. So dry, drought-tolerant plants are excellent materials to plant under oaks. So let's review briefly how best to take care of an oak. Try to avoid irrigating during the summer months. Do not disturb the roots. When pruning, limit it to 10 to 15% of the greenwood. Prune when the tree is dormant. That's usually during the summer or fall months. And then if you do landscape under your tree, choose drought-tolerant materials. Avoid things like azaleas, camellias, rhododendrons, ferns, which require frequent irrigation in order for them to do well in the garden. In 1985, a new disease of oak was observed primarily in the Bay Area of California, called sudden oak death. This is a canker disease of oak. You get an infected section in the trunk, and it weeps and bleeds. In 1999, it was diagnosed as caused by a new species of fungus called Phytophthora, and this new species has been called Phytophthora ramorum. And it has become an epidemic now in the Bay Area. There are 14 counties in California that are infested. These stretch from Santa Cruz County all the way up to Humboldt County, and there is one county in Oregon that is also infested. Over the last 5 years, it's been discovered that this disease also occurs in nursery production. And there are a number of common nursery plants that become infected or can become infected. These include rhododendron, camellia, viburnum, lilac, and the list goes on. There are roughly 60 species of plants now on the host list for sudden oak death, or as hosts for that particular pathogen, Phytophthora ramorum. Now on October 28th, here at the Arboretum, we're going to have a seminar covering primarily...
Hi, welcome back to Gardens of California, where we look at not just how to garden, but why we garden. Why do we like puttering around in the garden? What is it about being on your knees and cultivating that makes you feel at peace with the world? And why do we like lawns? And all those other great stimulating questions that keep you going. 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call. I'm open right now for any and all gardening questions, so give me a call at 1-800-339-1193. And just like to mention that we're live right now, and we're online. That means that you can call at any time with your gardening questions at 1-800-339-1193. And you can watch us online live. So if you're not within the cable range, you can click up dominguezonline.csudh.edu and go to the show portion, click on that, and you will get a streaming video live of Gardens of California. Of course, you have to do it at 2 o'clock on Sunday, but it will be there. And sometimes that's the best way to watch, especially if you're out of range of all the cable stations or you have Dish Network or any of the other things that don't carry us. So we're going to go back to the What Is It plant and see if anybody can catch this one, and I'll give you a small hint. It might be a big hint. Take a look at this plant. It's gorgeous, isn't it? Beautiful orange trumpet-shaped flowers, kind of narrow leaves. Now I'm just looking for the genus name or the common name on this plant. And one thing about it, it is a California native. Actually, this one, particular one here, is a hybrid of a California native and another one. And it has kind of trumpet-shaped flowers. And here's the big hint. The common name has something to do with primates. The common name has something to do with primates. That's a really big hint. And if y'all don't get that one, there's no hope for us. But I'm sure you will. 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call. 1-800-339-1193. And I am going to go into, I want to show you, I got several calls this last week about gophers. Apparently gophers never sleep, and right now they're getting ready to kind of hunker down for the winter time. So they're looking to A, get nice and fat, and B, store some food. So they're really active right now in people's gardens who have these pesky critters, and I want to go over some of the control methods. So basically it's trapping, poisoning, and gas. But gas is not that effective. Let me just go over some of these. This right here is a trap. And this is a newer trap that's supposed to be easier to work with, right there. I haven't seen this trap before, but I saw the hoopla and the advertising for it. So I sat down just before the show and tried to get this trap to work. No luck. No luck at all. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It just means I haven't figured it out yet. So, but it's a lot easier to deal with. See, if you were to figure out how to set it, it's a lot easier to set than the old Maccabee traps, if you remember those. And traps are pretty effective. Right now, you're better off going with poisoning. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and I'm going to get to them in just a little bit, but I want to take a phone call. I have a caller right now. Yes, Jim from West Hills. How you doing? Jim?
Oh, great. Frank, is that a monkey flower?
Yes, it's a monkey flower. Congratulations. Congratulations, Jim. You win my respect, the respect of everybody else watching Gardens of California, and you're going to get some mycorrhizal tablets in the mail. Jim, have you ever grown monkey flower? Jim?
No, there are two species of monkey flower native to the hills around me. There's the bush monkey flower, and then there is sticky monkey flower, and there's also even a local subspecies, which is a scarlet monkey flower in Chatsworth.
Jim, you sound like you're maybe a botanist.
No, I was an archaeologist for many years, and I'm into native plants and birds and flora and fauna. I used to be a docent with the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy as well.
You know that you just on the respect meter here, you just you just went off the charts.
Oh, thanks. I really, really enjoy your show, Frank, and I got to tell all the people out there, I've been watching him on and off for like a few years, and I've never seen anybody stump Frank McDonough. I got to say, I got to hand it to you. It's a great show, and I try to catch it whenever I can.
Thanks, Jim. Now you're going to get that airmail. Thank you very much. And yes, you're correct. It's a monkey
and
flower.
One more thing.
Yeah.
I do have a severe problem with gophers. And the only method I've had much luck with is the bait, which is a kind of a seed.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're correct on that. Especially, I'm going to go over that again, but in the wintertime, they aren't really that active, and they won't eat a lot of stuff, you put out for them. They're very wary of traps. And actually, almost all the time, they're very wary of traps. And so trapping is kind of tough. The best time of year to get them is usually in the fall. It's just before they kind of go semi-dormant. They don't go completely dormant. They don't hibernate, but they just kind of get more relaxed. And they're hungry. There's not a lot of food out there because a lot of the greens out in the garden have ripened due to the fall weather. They've ripened and they're not nutritious anymore. A lot of plants will take the nutrition from the leaves and pull it down into the roots to get through the wintertime. Like Bermuda grass, for example, when it goes dormant, it's taking a lot of the nutrition from the leaves and shunting it down into the roots and the rhizomes. And therefore, the gophers don't really have that much to work with, and so they kind of slow down. But if you give them something they're not used to, like the bait, which is very tasty, they'll go hog wild over it. So, in fact, we have a new bait I'm going to show in just a bit, too, that's different from the strychnine. And I've just seen this the first time available for the public. Jim, hold on to the line. We're going to get your vitals, everything we need to know to send you the prize.
Okay.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much for identifying the plant, and thanks for the compliments. 1-800-339-1193. Look at that picture of the gopher. Oh, you don't want to run into that one. That is a Rambo gopher behind me. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's one of the hazards of trying to wipe out gophers. They just might get a little vengeful on you. So that is a neat picture. There's another one there too. 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call if you have a question. The next method, trapping, is fairly effective. There are times of year when it's better. One of the tricks you can use with trapping, by the way, is to smear peanut butter on the trap and then put lettuce, carrots, or other fresh greens behind the trap. Again, they're still very wary of things like that. That's why they've survived and haven't become extinct. Here's one of the least effective methods, and that is a smoke bomb. And what this is supposed to do is fill their dens up with carbon monoxide, which kills them. It only works in certain soil types, and even then it only works when the soil is moist. You have to make sure that all of the holes that they can dig out are totally filled, and the soil should be pretty moist. So you may want to, if you want to give this a try, I would try it right around wintertime when everything's really wet from our perennial rains, and or you can just kind of try it during the 4th of July as a regular smoke bomb. What the heck? I wouldn't. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't suggest using one of these as a firework, but they're fairly useless. They're basically made up of very low ignition or very slow burning gunpowder. We have sodium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal. So we're looking at a big chunk of black powder, and again, supposedly it not only asphyxiates them, but gives them carbon monoxide poisoning. And again, it's not a very effective product. Here's another trap. I just like the trap because of the name. It's called the black hole. And it's supposedly better to catch a gopher with than the regular traps because the gopher has to commit itself before the trap releases itself. So the gopher will go and you'll have maybe some bait in the very bottom of this thing. The gopher will come in and halfway it'll hit this little lever and then boom, no more gopher. The downside with any trap, by the way, is that you have to clean them out. You have to take that carcass and dump it in the trash. Just highly disgusting operation. This right here is the way to go for most gopher control, and that is poison bait. This poison bait's different. I haven't seen this before, and if anybody out there has tried this type of bait, let me know. I know it's used by pest control, professional pest control people, and it is zinc phosphide. And zinc phosphide reacts with compounds in the soil. It reacts to form a gas, phosphine gas, which is a nerve agent that was used in World War I. It does not do this, it does not do this to the degree that you have to worry about anything, because most of that is absorbed by plant material nearby, and it's turned into phosphate, and it's used by the plant. But gophers eat these, and it turns into that gas inside of their gut, and it basically kills them rather rapidly. The best way to apply this is to use one of these critters, these devices right here. This, and I've shown this several times before on the show, this is a bait applicator. And this particular one is made by a company called Yard Butler bait applicator. And the way it works is you unscrew the top of this reservoir right here and add the bait into this reservoir and replace that top. And then you go to where the gophers are. Now, how do you know where the gophers are? Because they're hiding all the time. They leave mounds. Now, you're thinking this is going to be a simple job. All I need to do is to go to where the mounds are and apply the bait there. Well, this is not the case. Most mounds are plugging up the side tunnels of the gophers' runs. Not the main runs, but the side tunnels. They're always very cautious of the side tunnels. They're always very wary of eating food from these side tunnels. And so what you need to do is to use the probe to discover where the main runs of the gophers are. And the best way to do that, to find that main run, is to create a circle in your mind that's about 1.5 to 2 feet in diameter around the piles of soil that indicate where their access tunnels are. Push down on this probe every half foot around that circle, and when you come to a place where all of a sudden you're pushing down and it gives like that, that means that you've hit a gopher tunnel. So once you've hit that gopher tunnel, you pull up a little bit because you don't want to deposit this into the ground underneath the gopher tunnel, and then you crank the crank a couple of times as recommended by the manufacturer of the bait or the manufacturer of the bait applicator. And you do that for every mound of dirt you see, apply it in all the tunnels. And that'll take care of your gophers, but it won't take care of the gopher problem. What happens is that gophers are attracted to residences because of the available food there. If you're growing a lot of tasty gopher treats, you're going to have a lot of gophers. Tasty gopher treats include most annuals, root vegetables, most vegetables for that matter, and just about any plant that is an annual or biennial that isn't extremely toxic. For instance, plants like larkspur and others like it that are fairly toxic usually aren't affected by gophers, but that isn't always the case. So what you need to do is to figure out where the gophers are coming from. They're usually coming from an area, either a neighbor that's not controlling them or a vacant lot. You figure out where they're coming from, and you make sure that you plant no enticing plants between that area and your yard. If you want annuals, go on the opposite side of the yard from where you think the gophers are coming from. Very neat strategy. There's another strategy you can use that is a hit or miss, but if it hits big, and that is to install an owl shelter underneath your eaves. Owls like to hang out in places where they're kind of semi-hidden. They'll hang on a branch where they can get an overview of all the prey that's around. And owl shelters purportedly will attract owls to your house. Now, this doesn't work in the middle of the city. This doesn't work in most areas of the suburb. It may work in, say, Calabasas or Ventura County, Sylmar, areas that are close to the foothills, close to woodlands. You're not going to get any owls in scrub areas to the extent you will in woodlands. Close to oak woodlands, and you have a good chance of attracting owls, and they'll help you control the rodent population around your house. Very interesting. So, again, this is Gardens of California, and I am right now open for any and all gardening questions. So call me right now at 1-800-339-1193 with your gardening questions. And when we get back, we're going to be looking at a really neat video. You're going to like this one. So I'm going to put this video on while I'm waiting for calls, but this is a really neat video. What would you think, or what do you think a group of art students would come up with, this is design students, if they were asked to design gardening tools. Now, gardening tools haven't changed for hundreds of years. You've got your hoe, you've got your cultivator, you have maybe an edger. A lot of these were invented 100 years ago or more. So what happens when you take Art Center School of Design students and you tell them to develop garden tools that nobody else has seen before? Well, we're going to see what that's like in just a bit because we're going to take a look at a video. I interviewed 2 of these students and what they developed. So let's take a look.
I'm Luke Weta, and my project was for John Deere. And my target area was like older gardeners with arthritis problems in their hands and stuff. So basically, the whole theme of it was using magnets in the glove that would electrically charge through them to turn them on, and it would connect to like the handles of the tools, so it'd give them a better grip, and the magnets would be covered in rubber, or like a gel rubber that would help it stick to it. So like when you were digging or something, it'd give more friction to your hand so it wouldn't slip when you're digging and stuff. So you would be able to turn the glove on and grab onto it, and you dig and you could turn it off and let go. So I made a tool like that where the heads would switch where you had one handle, and then I decided to also do a grip where you could apply it to any other, like a shovel or a rake or any other basic gardening tool with a...
Alright, my name is Michael. I'm from Art Center at Knight's Intro to Product and Trans Intensive. The project was pick a brand, design a reason why I have to design gardening tools for them, and what the target market is, how you would produce it, when you would sell it, such and so on and so forth. The reason why I picked Honda as a brand is because Honda is very well known for their innovative, environmentally savvy products. They're also very reliable, and they're also well known for making a vast area of different products, such as they make air compressors, they make engines, of course, they make cars, they make lawnmowers, they make gardening equipment. They make a lot of other different things. So I was thinking it would also be wonderful if they could start making, manual gardening tools, because they also have a really large following and they have a really big name. And people these days, customers like to take pride in what they buy. So, and Honda is a name that customers would definitely take pride in what they have.
Well,
so,
what's new and innovative about about your tools?
New and innovative about my tools? Well, for my mock-up, the first one right here, a 3-prong cultivator, it also switches to single prong. The tines come back together so you can use it as a single prong. The thing about 3-prong is that you can cover a large amount of area, break up rocks, pick out rocks, and aerate a large space of ground. But then you also want to be able to fit between cracks and take out, weeds, or pick out, little things that are in the way, roots. So it's kind of inconvenient to have 2 tools in your hands, or rather, if you could just combine both tools and just make it come to one.
So this is like one-size-fits-all cultivator.
Yeah. My instructor, Tony, gave me heck for not clarifying how the mechanics would work on such a cultivator. So I drew exploded views and the mechanics on how this would function. Another tool that I also worked on was a hose, a fitment for a hose, and the only thing I changed on it is that it's really annoying to twist it onto a hose, because it's always a screw fitting. I thought it'd be kind of convenient if it had the same fittings as maybe an air compressor does, so you could just latch it on, unlatch it off. And a saw. Saw is like a tool that's remained unchanged for years. So I thought it'd be really convenient if it had a saw that had 2 blades, come from the top and come from the bottom, latch on, and you could just cut through anything really fast. Literally twice the speed, of course.
So is Honda going to pick this up?
Those are kind of high hopes, but it'd be cool if they did. It would be an awesome idea because they seriously have a huge following for them, for their gardening tools. So if they started making manual tools, I'm pretty sure people would buy it.
Is that cultivator going to be 2-stroke, 4-stroke, or hybrid?
That cultivator is just going to be manual, as always, as all the other tools are.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome back to Gardens of California. This is the 1.5-hour class that looks at not just the how to garden, but the why we garden. And today's lecture is going to be about renewable, recyclable, and reasonable things for your garden. By the way, I just love the look of that saw. I can't wait till it's out on the market, I tell you. Back from the bottom and the top, think of the uses. Anyway, 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call. 1-800-339-1193 is the number to call. Right now I'm open for any and all gardening questions, so give me a call. And what about renewable, recyclable, and reasonable materials in our garden? Let's take a look at history and see what kind of recyclable or renewable resources that we've used as a species here, the human species. Starting out a long time ago, probably before written history, somebody figured out that dumping manure around fruit trees not only increased the size of the fruit trees, but increased the size and the yield of the fruit. And I don't know how they figured that out. They must have figured, gee, Thog, that fig tree that you park your cattle under really does a great job of producing figs. What's your secret? So Thog thought about it and said, it must be the cows. And yeah, it's the cows. Cow manure is anywhere from 2 to 4% nitrogen. Nitrogen is a vital building block of plant tissue. Without nitrogen, plants would not be able to function. And so they figured out that manuring things, taking cow manure and spreading it around large plants, would increase the size of the plants, increase the yield of fruit, and in some cases even make the fruit sweeter. Again, cattle manure, if it's fresh, is about 0.5% nitrogen. And dried, it increases. Of course, that's because all the water leaves, and it's up to 2%. Our next manure that we're going to look at is horse manure. Now, not too many people use horse manure out in their gardens. Well, why is that? Going back to the cow manure, it has a lot of nitrogen, and it's fairly readily available. It leaches into the ground or decays into the ground within 2 years, 3 years. It's because that manure is very full of bacteria, and as a result, the bacteria themselves are mostly, a lot of them are nitrogen. They have DNA in them, which is mostly made of nitrogen. A lot of the cell tissues have a lot of nitrogen in it. And so that plant material is broken down and converted into nitrogen through these microorganisms in the stomachs of the cows. And the way cows work, they have 4 stomachs. The food passes in between all 4 of them, and each time it passes through a stomach, it gets more and more fermented. In other words, it gets more and more full of microorganisms. That's what makes cow manure so ideal, is that the nitrogen is readily available. You don't have to break down the cellulose, and the cellulose is the stuff that makes plants rigid, creates their structure, and that's what wood is made out of, cellulose. Most microorganisms have a hard time breaking down cellulose. That's the reason plants develop cellulose in the first place, to keep microorganisms from breaking them down. And so the horse manure has a lot of cellulose. Horses are not as efficient in their digestive process. They kind of pass a lot of stuff through unchanged. And horse manure needs to be composted for the most part before it can be used in the garden. If you don't compost it, a couple of interesting things can happen. And this holds true somewhat for cow manure as well. Because it is basically mostly cellulose, it's broken down by microorganisms. These microorganisms, when they're breaking stuff down, pull nitrogen in from the surrounding soil. And you get a condition in the surrounding soil where there's actually less nitrogen than normal. And so putting very green manure onto plants results in an initial loss of nitrogen. And this is very true with horse manure. Another hazard of horse manure is that this stuff literally can explode. Because it has so much cellulose in it, it's very it's very attractive for what are called cellulitic microorganisms. These are microorganisms that can break down cellulose. Most of these microorganisms use heat to help break down that cellulose, and they're very active. These are called thermophilic fungi and bacteria, and they can heat the soil pile up to above 150, 170 degrees, and so you can get spontaneous ignition in piles of horse manure. This is especially common with straw, but it's also been noted with horse manure. If the horse manure has been mixed in with straw, you have barn fires starting back in the olden days before they figured out what was going on. You had a lot of barn fires that would start from piles of wet hay and horse manure igniting all at once spontaneously without any warning. And that's because of the thermophilic bacteria and fungi that were able to raise the temperature up of that compost, that cellulitic or cellulose-filled compost. Another type of manure that's very commonly used is chicken manure. And chicken manure is approximately, I have a chart on this, so I want to get right on. Chicken manure, if it's dried, is approximately, get this, 4.5% nitrogen. Compare that to the 2% nitrogen of steer manure or cow manure. That is a lot of nitrogen. And that's why if you're using chicken manure in your garden, it's a really good idea to dig it in a couple of months ahead of time, or at least a month before you start planting your garden. Now, another interesting thing about chicken manure is that the nitrogen in chicken manure is very, very available to the plants. It's not readily available, but it breaks down very fast, and you get most of that nitrogen out into the soil in about a year. Cow manure, on the other hand, it takes a while for that nitrogen to break down. It can take up to 2, maybe even 3 years for all of the nitrogen to be realized from that cow manure. Another really interesting manure that's used a lot today, especially by what I like to call closet gardeners, people who garden under lights, and that is bat guano. Why bat guano? Well, the interesting thing about bat guano is it's up to 40% nitrogen. That's a lot of nitrogen. And most of this nitrogen is water soluble, which means it's in a nitrate form, and that is readily available to the plant as well. So it's in a form, the nitrogen is in a form that's readily available to the plant, so you get immediate results. You have a high concentration of nitrogen, and the bat manure is less likely to burn than a lot of other different types of manure. Now, why is bat manure so darn high in nitrogen? It has to do with the bat's diet. They eat insects. They eat a lot of insects. In fact, all they eat is insects, and insects are very high in nitrogen. A lot of the body tissues of insects are very high in nitrogen. There's also carbon and other compounds too, but very high in nitrogen, and bats don't need the nitrogen. They want mostly the other parts of the proteins, and so they will exude this manure out in caves. It's collected by miners, people who mine this stuff, and they ship it. Initially, it was a very, very good substitute for bird guano. Bird guano, before the turn of the century, was used by citrus growers to get that added oomph and increase yields. But bird guano, it came from one source off of South America, I do believe, and as a result, the price was increasingly higher and higher until people found out there was gobs of good stuff that was just as good for fertilizing as the bird guano in the New Mexico area and Texas, where there are a lot of fruit bat colonies. These, if you've ever seen, they've been on the Discovery Channel and seen, say for instance, the Dirty Jobs guy, there's one segment where he goes into a bat cave in Texas with a biologist to take a survey. And the numbers of bats in that cave are astounding. Millions of bats in that colony, all producing fertilizer. Well, in some of these caves, they've been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so you have deposits of guano that still haven't even been scraped to the surface yet. Huge deposits of guano. The only reason that guano is still there, most probably, though, even with the high demand there was for it, is that synthetic fertilizers took over that place that bat guano held for citrus growers, and as a result, the market, some synthetic fertilizers came out, the market for bat guano went down, and there's plenty of bat guano out there. And it is a renewable resource. I don't think the bats mind that much that you take the guano out, except for one thing. You do not want to collect guano from a living bat colony, because that can disturb the bats and eventually lead to their demise from the colony. That was probably way more than you need to know about bat guano. Just that bats are a subject near and dear to my heart. Finally, when it comes to manures, one of the most intriguing is night earth. Night earth is used a lot in Asia and different parts of the world for fertilizing plants. Night earth is a very nice way to say human fecal material. Yeah, human fecal material. Needless to say, the use of night earth is very dangerous. That particular, night earth can contain a lot of diseases, etc. And so there are a lot of governments out there now in areas where they've been using this for a while, making regulations to make sure that the use and application of night earth is sanitary. And even here in LA, if you buy like nitrohumus or any planter mix for that matter, most of them these days have sewer sludge, which is basically treated night earth. Sewer sludge comes from our sewers, and it's very high in nitrogen, but it's not a very good thing to use around vegetables or anything that you plan on eating. Other than that, it's a great way to recycle. Nitrogen goes through the environment in what's called a nitrogen cycle, and that is that nitrogen is first in the soil. I mean, soil has very big spaces in it, relatively speaking, compared to atoms of gas. And so it effuses into the soil where nitrogen-fixing bacteria and take it out of the air and create nitrates and ammonium and other nitrogen-bearing compounds. Once the ammoniums, the nitrates, and the other nitrogen ions are in the soil, they're available for the use of other microorganisms and plants. Once a plant uses that nitrogen, and that nitrogen is, the plants can burn and release nitrogen into the air. It's also eaten by other animals, and those animals eat the plant material, and then they add the nitrogen back into the soil through their rear ends. And so that's why it's not completely reliant, the nitrogen cycle is not completely reliant on those small nitrogen-fixing microorganisms. Again, cows, pigs, other animals, chickens, bats, all help recycle nitrogen back into the ground. Another way, by the way, that nitrogen is sometimes made is through thunderstorms. Also, precipitation can bring nitrogen out of the air as well. Nitrogen reacts with water to form ammonium and nitrates. So there's a lot of ways that this cycle is completed, but the key element is that recycling is a very important part of the cycle. And that recycling is usually done through the rear ends of animals like us. Composting is an interesting way to recycle green material in your garden. I've touched on composting a little bit. It's not recommended that you throw manures in with compost. And that's because what I was mentioning before with the thermophilic bacteria, that can get out of control and you can have a mess. So, but composting is an art and a science, and it's the best thing to do if you want to learn to compost is to take a composting class. And those are available through the local county government, through agricultural extensions, and through agricultural colleges. For instance, Cal Poly, UC Davis, especially UC Davis. UC Davis has Master Gardener program, and a lot of times they will hold composting workshops, as well as the County of Los Angeles Public Works holds composting workshops throughout the Los Angeles County area. And I would recommend you attend one of those workshops because there's a lot about composting that's kind of that are finesse points that you really have to know. Another way to recycle material is to use it as a mulch. And this is particularly true with bark and other hardwood items, hardwood, softwood, bark. Mulch is best comprised of compounds that slowly decay and leach organic materials into the soil. For instance, bark mulch. That's what you see behind me is what's called shredded bark. And what is the difference, by the way, between a mulch and a planter mix or an amendment? Simple. Mulches go on top, and you don't mix them up with the soil. And not only do they provide nutrients into the soil, they provide temperature regulation for the root zone of the plant, and they provide food for beneficial microorganisms, as well as preventing weeds from coming up around the plant and competing with the plant. And in fact, in nature, you'll see a lot of trees and shrubs that do what's called self-mulching. For instance, we had a question about an avocado early on in the program, and that gentleman asked about leaving the leaves around the avocado, and I told him that it was the most ideal situation, and if you can't do that, use a bark mulch. And that's because avocados really require that mulch around them. They have very fibrous root systems, they're very susceptible to temperature and drying, and so you don't want to let that entire root area dry out completely. It puts a lot of stress on the plant. It won't kill it, but it'll drop fruit, it'll drop leaves, and it'll make it more susceptible to disease. And so mulch, either its own leaves or a regular bark mulch will help. Eucalyptus, great example of a tree that self-mulches. These things litter like crazy. They're constantly dropping twigs, capsules, flowers, bark, big branches, all kinds of stuff. And as a result, if you go anywhere in Australia and you look at the ground underneath these huge eucalyptus trees, you'll see lots and lots of eucalyptus duff. That is the way the eucalyptus mulches itself. It mulches itself by creating a layer of mulch from its own dead body parts. So, very fascinating how nature works, isn't it? Now, what about oak leaves and oak disease? There's a new disease, sudden oak decline, that's out there, and it's been implicated in oaks. And the thing is, with oak leaves, and this fungus, which is actually not a fungus, but a different type of organism, but it's more convenient to call it that. There's been no absolute proof that oak leaf mulch carries it, but there's been no absolute refutal that it carries it as well. And so I would suggest not using this material, the oak leaf mold, if you have oaks or camellias or azaleas for that matter, because they're sensitive to this fungus too. If you have oaks, camellias, azaleas, or any other sensitive plant to sudden oak death, then you need to not use it. But if you have other plants that aren't sensitive, you can go ahead and use it. It's a great mulch. Oak leaves break down very slowly, and they provide a lot of vital compounds for not only oaks, but other trees and shrubs in oak woodlands. One of my favorite mulches, by the way, is cocoa mulch. Cocoa mulch is derived from the husk of the cacao pod and the waste process of making chocolate. And in fact, actually it's the seed coat, the seed coat of the cacao bean. When the cacao bean is roasted, it's much like coffee, that seed coat comes off, and it's very fine and fluffy looking. It's also very dark. Cocoa mulch smells like chocolate. Very distinctive smell. It'll do that for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, you'll notice a white fungus growing all over it. Don't worry about that, it goes away. The only drawback to cocoa mulch is that it is somewhat poisonous for dogs. Actually, it's a lot poisonous for dogs. So if you have dogs, don't use it. Or if you think dogs will be in the area, don't use it. It's great to use in a backyard garden where you know the dogs aren't going to be. It's the theobromine and the other alkaloids, the stimulating alkaloids, same stuff that's in coffee, is in cacao, as well as what are called phenylalanines, which are another class of stimulants. And it'll overstimulate your dog to the point of death. It's just like if you've ever had a dog eat a chocolate bar, same deal. So don't use this stuff if you have a dog. One of the really neat aspects of mulch is its weed curtailing, its weed inhibition, the ability for this stuff to keep weeds down. And it does that both physically and in some cases it does that chemically. A lot of mulches will prevent weeds from germinating because they can't get to the soil where they need to be sitting on to germinate. They dry out too rapidly. But also, this mulch produces compounds that can inhibit seed germination. Now, not all mulches do this, but quite a few do. There's also synthetic weed block. The problem I have with synthetic weed block is that it's not generally recycled material, although some of them can be. And one of the big problems with synthetic weed block is it tends to harbor ants. In fact, when fire ants came to Southern California, the first place they found them at was a nursery that had lots and lots of the synthetic weed block underneath the containers. And what happened is some ants came in with a container from Florida or another fire ant area, and these fire ants got out of the container, went underneath the weed block cloth, and created huge colonies. And I had that same experience personally with weed block cloth. It tends to attract ants. So if you're going to use weed block cloth, make sure you put it in an area that is not attractive to ants, which is kind of tough to find, and also have your ant control ready. Another interesting recycled mulch is tire mulch. Mulch made out of used tires. Now, there was a little bit of a controversy about this mulch a few years back. Some people felt that the zinc in the tire mulch was toxic to people, which is a surprise to me because I've occasionally used zinc lozenges to treat my cold. Well, turns out the zinc is not all that harmful except in certain situations. When you have a highly acidic soil, the zinc tends to replace another vital micronutrient in certain plants, and as a result, the plants can die in very acid soil. Let's talk about a few other strategies in recycling, and that is recycling water. Now, I talked a lot about water in our Mulholland effect lecture, and I'm just going to touch on this subject, and that is the recycling of water. A lot of European countries along the Mediterranean encourage the use of cisterns that are connected. Cisterns are water storage vessels. They're either above ground or below ground, connected to rain collectors on the roof. And what happens is when it rains, and it doesn't rain very often in the Mediterranean, it rains like our rains do, which is in the wintertime, that water is collected off and brought into a cistern, and that's used as drinking water. The problem with doing that here is twofold. You don't know what your roof is really made or treated with. And so whatever is in that roof that's water soluble that may be harmful to you, like some kind of preservative, will show up in your water. Number two is that because we're in an area that's high in air pollution, a lot of this water contains particulates and is acidic to a great degree. Mostly contains smog particulates, and those particulates can contain lead, arsenic, and other neat little things that are added to gasoline and other fuels, or just plain off burned when fuels are burned. So not a good idea to use recycled water as drinking water, but excellent idea to use recycled water for plants and for growing vegetables. And finally, I'm going to talk about two more things in the lecture I want to touch about, and that is gray water recycling. Taking the water from your bathtub, from your wash machine, from your kitchen sinks, and diverting that into your garden. Well, there's a couple of serious drawbacks. One, you have to replumb to get that water out into your garden. And two, and I was mentioning this a few sessions before, when you bathe or when you wash clothes, you get stuff, fecal material, in that water. And as a result, that water can be contaminated to a high degree with E. coli and other organisms that can make you sick. And so if you use a system like this, it's recommended that A, you don't use it on any plants you plan on using as food, and B, that you use it in such a way that it comes out underneath the ground and diffuses in through the ground. And the reason for that is that the ground contains lots of microorganisms that either compete or actually kill E. coli and other human-borne bacteria. and it renders that water a lot safer for your garden. Again, it's not for drinking and it's not for using on vegetables. Time for us to go. I'd like to thank everybody for watching, and I'd like to congratulate the winner of the What Is It, and Burkhardt Nurseries for fine plants. And until next week, everybody, goodbye and good gardens.